Hey, Josh Larson here, and before we get started with this episode, I wanted to share some news. Think Christian is now finally on Instagram. So follow us for reels, stories, all sorts of fun stuff. We'll see you there. Welcome to the Think Christian podcast, where we talk about faith and pop culture because there's no such thing as secular. I'm Josh Larson. Now, in space, no one can hear you scream, but in Alien Romulus, you can hear all sorts of drippy, goopy sounds, thanks to the horror focus of this installment in the long-running sci-fi franchise. Longtime TC followers know that we have a resident alien expert among us, Sarah Welch Larson, who wrote a book on the franchise. Sarah's going to join me along with J.R. Forasteros for this show. We'll place this new movie among its predecessors and consider what it might have to say about things like creation, evil, and exploitation. Have a listen. Welcome to J.R. Forasteros and Sarah Welch Larson. So Sarah, you're the author of Becoming Alien, The Beginning and End of Evil in Science Fiction's Most Idiosyncratic Franchise, which covers the 6 previous Alien films. So I want to know, when you see a new installment like Alien Romulus, are you excited because it's going to renew interest in the topic, or does it kind of stress you out? You know, you feel like you need to add a chapter now.
I was terrified that Alien Romulus wasn't going to fit my grand unifying theory of the Alien movies, and I have a lot of mixed feelings, but it does fit, which is exciting, but it also expands on the topic a little bit more. So I feel like I need to write a little bit more about the Alien movies, maybe more to come on that front. But it got me really excited about the Alien series in a way that I haven't been tangibly in a couple of years now. So like cicadas, I am emerging from the ground once more to scream about xenomorphs.
I love it. Yes. Well, we'll maybe get to how it does connect with your grand theory. Now, JR, I also read your book, Empathy for the Devil, Finding Ourselves in the Villains of the Bible. It's been a while. I don't remember. Do you draw parallels between any biblical figures and aliens, xenomorphs there?
I honestly don't. If I were going to draw parallels, it'd probably be more with the Weyland-Yutani folk than with the xenomorph, you know?
You're speaking my language, JR.
Yeah, that connects with Sarah's grand unified theory. Indeed.
I mean, I think the point of the original 1979 film is that the corporation's the worst villain.
Yes.
You know,
Absolutely.
because the xenomorph runs on biology, it's evolution, it's genes and instinct. Whereas Weyland-Yutani is making choices.
We're jumping into all the good stuff right
Sorry,
away.
yeah,
this is so good. This is why these movies are wonderful. All right, so let's get to Alien Romulus, directed by horror veteran Fede Alvarez, who is new to the series, a new director here. This is set between the events of Alien, the first film JR was just talking about, and Aliens, the second. And Romulus follows a rogue group of miners who are attempting to flee their dead-end jobs, basically, for the same corporation, if I understand it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this plan to snatch basically space travel equipment from a decommissioned space station that has appeared in orbit of their planet. Needless to say, something else is also on board.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sarah, we saw Alien Romulus together back here in Chicago. We haven't really discussed it much since. So take me back to that screening. Give me your first impressions of it, and then where you're at with the movie now.
First impressions, starting off, I was pretty excited because it felt like Alvarez and the rest of the crew had kind of nailed the aesthetic, especially of the classic Alien movies, all the way back to the opening credit crawl where the camera's kind of floating across space and you see everybody's names in this very specific 1970s sans serif font. And then that opening prologue actually kind of takes you through an accelerated version of Alien, where you see something floating in space that's not supposed to be there, or that's going to mess you up if you find it floating there. And then there's some visuals from Aliens where people are kind of cutting into the thing that is holding the alien. And then it skips ahead a little bit to some of the visuals from Alien Resurrection, actually, which involves, scientists carting away the alien for their own nefarious purposes. And as the movie began to unfold, I knew that it was very clear that the filmmakers have a lot of love for these movies, especially with all of the little knickknacks and Easter eggs. There's the Dippy bird that's in every single one of these movies. movies. There's references to cornbread, which is actually a deep cut from Aliens, like a specific line. And there are like a lot of these little pieces of set decoration and set design that feel very lovingly ripped and slightly updated for a slightly faster paced sensibility, I would say. And as the movie went on, I knew I was in pretty good hands. Where I started to get a little bit worried was the moments where the film felt obligated to remind us that we were continually watching an alien movie, especially as it began to quote previous installments in the series a little bit more. There are some direct lines that make more sense if you're aware of the context where they first show up, especially most of those lines come directly from Aliens. And then there are a few pieces that just felt like they were a little bit unnecessarily shoehorned in and kind of trying to drive home a point that the movie was already pretty good at getting to. I have some reservations about a couple of the things that come up a little bit later in the film, but overall, it feels like an alien movie. It certainly looks like an alien movie, and it's kind of in line with that idea of the corporation is there to exploit you, and that's the ultimate evil in this part of the universe.
I think we'll probably get to some of those reservations in a spoiler section we'll do at the end of this conversation, because it involves some surprises and choices that haven't gone over very well in one case with a lot of viewers. And yeah, I think also, Sarah, you touched on a common complaint so far are those nods to the previous films being a little heavy-handed. Mm-hmm. Was that something, JR, that you enjoyed, or did you feel like it went a little too far in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a needle that's impossible to thread, right?
Yes.
Like some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it, some people are going to have no idea what you were talking about. You know, when you say, "Oh, I can't," you know, there was one line in particular that clanged for me. But if someone said there were 3 lines that clanged for them, I wouldn't fight them on it, right?
Yeah.
Overall, I agree with what Sarah said about this feeling like it belonged in the alien universe to a great degree. I mean, it felt like an alien movie, and all of the really, really subtle details that you don't even really notice until they're not there in a movie, right? And so, yeah, I saw it with my wife and another friend of ours who co-hosts our little horror podcast that we do. And all 3 of us were horrified throughout. I mean, it also might have helped. I don't know if this was on purpose, but, you know, the whole thing is they're trying to get coolant for cryo chambers. And right. So our theater was like 95 degrees.
Oh, no.
So I don't know if that was like I don't know if it was like a 5D experiential thing to make us, you know, but yeah, it was definitely not a cold sweat, but we had some terror sweats going on. I would say I thought that the xenomorph peril was a little, I hate to say this, but like a little rote at this point. My wife made the complaint that she wished there had been more of them. And I was like, yeah, it didn't feel like they were in as much danger. And maybe that's just because this has become such a familiar creature over 7 or 8 or 9 films.
Sure.
Or whatever, you know, depending on if you count Alien versus Predator or not.
We don't speak of those movies in this house.
I'm glad I'm on the same
Sarah's book. Yeah. It doesn't count.
Nope.
So after a wildly uneven franchise, I have relatively low standards for the Alien films. And I thought this one was a lot of fun. It had its problems, but man, one of the better theatrical experiences I've had this year. So.
Yeah. It was fun. Our theater too, Sarah, a lot of jumps in the seats. I mean, definitely delivers on that front. I'm glad I saw it with the audience on a big screen. Absolutely. And came out positive on it as well. I think I could have used probably less, JR, that scale for me, less references would have been better. Less xenomorphs, honestly, probably would have been better to me. I was kind of the other way, where the more of them we got, you're right, it somehow felt less dangerous, even though technically the threat was greater. I don't know. There's something just about one xenomorph lurking in a corner dripping is gonna freak me out way more than 30 running down a corridor in a blur. You know, it's just something like that. And we get both here. We get a lot of dripping, that's for sure.
And I do have to say, there's a specific shot right after our hapless crew discover that there are facehuggers on board the space station, and they slam the doors shut behind them and go running off down a corridor. And then there are a ton of little face huggers just kind of prying the door open,
That's
and you can
great.
see their hands prying each other apart. I know I cackled out loud when I saw that image. I'm pretty sure you
Absolutely.
did too, Josh,
Oh yeah.
actually. Yeah.
That moment probably got the biggest reaction, if I'm
Mhm.
remembering correctly. And that was striking a nice balance there. Part of the fear was that it's not just one face hugger, it is this collection of them, but using the door to make it a more tactile moment where we can actually feel those little claws or whatever they are trying to pry it open worked in a way that I was talking about with just one xenomorph in the corner. So yeah, that's a great scene. I think that's probably the standout sequence in terms of scares or actions for me in the film. And it comes fairly early on. So, Sarah, I was immediately thinking about how Romulus might fit into your main concerns in the book, and I'm going to turn it over to you. I remember that, and you've touched on this a little bit, but correct me if I don't have it exactly right. But exploitation being the form of evil that these movies are exploring, even though there's this monster as well. So, what did you tell us a little bit more about what you found along that theme, or any others that you focused on in the book that you found to be here in Romulus?
Yeah, so the main theme of the book is a feminist theological reading of all 6 Alien movies through the lens of Dr. Catherine Keller, who's a process theologian. She has this book called Face of the Deep, A Theology of Becoming, that has to do with the idea of kind of challenging the idea of creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. So this theory has to do with God creating the universe in relation with everything else that exists. And so it follows that sin would be kind of denying that interrelationship and that created relationship that God has put into place. And so once you deny that interrelatedness, once you start treating people as tools, for example, then you start to exploit other people in a way that does not honor God and does not honor the createdness of other beings. And so the book kind of explores how each of the subsequent movies in the series unfold that concept a little bit more and clarify it a little bit more. And there's a turning point in the series where the focus becomes primarily on androids rather than on human beings, especially in the 2 prequels, Prometheus and Alien Covenant. And I was very gratified to see that Alien Romulus has a central android character who is kind of a thorny character to wrestle with. I don't fully know quite where I land with him, although the actor who plays him does an absolutely fantastic job kind of flipping back and forth between different modes of being. So when we first meet him, his name is Andy, short for android, and people keep reminding him of what he is or how they see him as being, which is a washed up, broken tool of Weyland-Yutani's that has been discarded. And he is constantly asserting his own personhood, although very, very quietly and not really violating any of his orders. And yet people still continue to treat him as though he's just a robot or he's just a tool. And they keep referring to him as just a synthetic. Every time they see an android, they automatically switch from him to it. And the movie does a really interesting job of kind of playing with that sense of personhood and who we allow to be human and who we bring into a circle of community. And I would argue that a big part of Alien Romulus is that individuals cannot face down the power of a corporation that is designed to exploit you, but in community, you can find an escape from that. And I think the movie does a really solid job of asserting that without kind of turning it into a sermon, which I very much appreciated. And I really liked wrestling with that character of Andy quite a bit.
That notion of community strikes me. The previous films, I'm dancing around how this movie ends, often,
Yes.
or I'm thinking of Alien, the first one, there is a lone survivor for sure, right?
Mhm.
Ripley, Sigourney Weaver. And here we get something more of a communal survival. It's related to this relationship between Andy, who you're talking about, played by David Johnson, who I
Yes.
agree is wonderful. I recognize him from a small movie from last year, I believe, Rye Lane, British romance. And yeah, he's really good as Andy. And then Kaylee Spaney plays probably the main character, Rain, who Andy is her brother, sort of. We learn that Rain's father found Andy after he had been discarded and got him up and running again, and then has given Andy to her, and then her parents have since passed, we learned. So there's this very strong bond. It's a different bond than most of the other android synthetic relationships I think we've seen in the series, in that it is familial in a sense. And I think that's speaking to this deep feeling of community you're talking about a little bit, Sarah, and how that plays out in the film, honestly, was the most interesting thing to me. I was so glad that we did get a synthetic, that we did get an android. A little uneasy about how he was portrayed at first, because
Mhm.
he's almost portrayed as if he has a learning disability. And that I was like, where are we going here? But he then transitions because, and this comes early on, there's not much of a spoiler, when they get to the space station, in order for them to operate some of it, he basically plugs in to the space station, which allows the company's programming to affect him also. And so the transition the performance makes there is incredibly interesting. And Johnson gets stronger and stronger as the movie goes on. JR, what'd you make of Andy as the latest android and Johnson's performance?
Yeah, I mean, if you watch the Alien movies, like one of the main rules is the androids are gonna get you, and I think they are a mirror to the xenomorph in a really profound way because, again, once you understand what the xenomorph is, it is manageable. You know, don't put your face over the egg, and then you're gonna avoid a whole bunch of problems, right? Because again, it is at the end of the day, it is a creature that is following a set of biological imperatives that are not, I think, very different from the android's programming. Which, Sarah, do you remember in this film they call it the primary directive?
Yes, it is.
Is that right?
Mhm.
So again, Andy's father, Andy and Rain's father, reprogrammed Andy so
Mhm.
that his new primary directive is do what's best for Rain.
Mhm.
Yes.
And there's a point where a fairly large revelation is made about how even Rain is not thinking in terms of us as much as in terms of me,
Mhm.
and how that would negatively impact Andy. And Andy goes, "That's fine. If that's what's best for Rain." And you get that he's not lying, right?
Mhm.
That is his programming. He's literally incapable of being angry at her if she's acting in her own best interests. And when he gets reprogrammed, and again, to anyone that's ever seen one other Alien movie, not a big surprise that his programming comes with a new primary directive that is do what is in the best interest of the company. And again, all of his actions are predictable and understandable because he is, at the end of the day, a machine following a program, just like the xenomorph, you know? And so I think that lets us really, really zero in on the human characters and how they are engaging these monstrous, seemingly, you know, Sarah, what you said, right? These inescapable, overwhelming institutions or creatures. And I really want to watch this film again and really tease out the way the relationships impact each other. I don't know if this was in your review or if it was just in our little horror movie text thread that we have with a couple of our friends, but you said somewhere that this film seems significantly more cynical about the hope of, do you remember saying that? Okay.
Yeah. I don't remember where I said it, but I do remember saying it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's true, right? Because as much as this film wants to argue about the power of community to overcome these things, sometimes choosing the us has pretty detrimental consequences for some of the characters.
Mhm.
So it is, and I think that's partly maybe where you meant that it's not as sermonic as it could have been.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think I feel comfortable saying the film wants us to think that maybe the only hope, it's not like automatically power of community, aha, we win, but maybe that our only hope to overcome these things is by banding together. And again, that's not a silver bullet. It's not going to automatically kill the xenomorph or blast it down an airlock or whatever, but certainly alone we perish.
It definitely increases the character's chances of survival. Absolutely. To loop back a little bit to the characterization of Andy, I was also a little bit troubled by how he is when we first meet him as well. But that's kind of what makes him the person that he is, or at least it's very strongly implied that once he receives overriding directives from the company, that kind of overwrites his humanity and turns him into even more of a tool than he already was
For sure.
to begin with.
For
So
sure.
that was one of the pieces that I really enjoyed wrestling with on
Yeah,
the second watch too.
And he loses his idiosyncrasies, basically, when the programming does take over. We've touched on this as a horror movie, and I also like, related to Andy, the moment where I believe it's a third set of programming, possibly, hits him is played like a possession scene. And this
Yes.
is in the trailer, but it's the red emergency lights are going on. His head flips back, his eyes roll back, and it's Alvarez has made the Evil Dead remake, and he made Don't Breathe. And it's like, oh yeah, if you forgot that's the filmmaker you're working with, it's like, oh, that's right. But incredibly effective in also communicating what you're talking about, Sarah, is that whatever Andy was before has been taken captive by this new programming, but it's given a very spiritual, almost demonic flavor in that moment. JR, I also wanted to ask you, because I did see, you posted on Instagram after seeing Alien Romulus, suggesting that it had things to say about our capacity to overcome the limits of our evolution and how we become our own worst enemies. So I've been waiting, for this chance to ask you to expand on either of those thoughts.
Okay.
You could just choose one, maybe.
So
that you're most intrigued by.
I have become a shill for this book called Eve by an author named Kat Bohannon, who is an evolutionary biologist. And she argues that recentering the female body in the story of human evolution changes how we understand human origins. It is a fascinating book. Bohannon is one of those writers who can take decades and decades of complex, advanced scientific research and make it accessible to someone like me who really did not have a great time in freshman biology. She's funny, she's interesting, her insights are just really provocative. So one of the things she argues, for instance, is that some of the first human tools were actually midwifing tools that were created to help humans survive birthing, because as we got bigger brains, we had to have bigger skulls, and then we had to have bigger shoulders to support our giant melon heads. And that's what actually makes human birth so deadly. This is all from the book. I knew none of this, right? So if you compare human birth to chimp birth, chimps are born with very small heads, and their brains and their heads grow significantly after they're born. Humans can't do that. And again, there's blah, blah, blah scientific reasons that I swear made sense when I read them. But again, I'm not a scientist, right? And so Bohannon argues that this combination of tool making, midwife, and midwifery laid the foundation for human society to begin. And she argues towards the end of the book, spoilers for Eve by Kat Bohannon, that it's actually our ability as humans to design systems that help us overcome our genetics that really makes us elevated above the animals. It is not our destiny to be tribalistic and to be survival of the fittest and all of these kinds of things. We have actually developed cultural technologies that help us rise above that. And that was all in the back of my head as I'm watching yet another horror movie about how scary birth is, right? Because also a deep theme of these alien movies is the fear of birth.
Yes.
And you have lots and lots of, we'll just call them unwanted pregnancies, right? Where these embryos are implanted without consent and then emerge without consent, often to deadly consequence. And again, this is what several of the androids throughout the series have called the perfect organism. This is what evolution has perfected, is this thing that exploits and destroys in order to birth. And again, we get that with the planet. We watch Rain walk up to the counter and say, hey, I finished my however many years it was. We see on the computer screen, we get to look over the little admin lady's shoulder that is in fact true. And while Rain is standing there, she changes it and says, oh no, JK, you've got twice as long still. And we know in that moment, she's never going to be allowed to leave, right? There's always going to be a new policy coming in. And so again, this company is the same. It is a system that is the opposite of what Bohannon has argued. We have the capacity to create these liberating systems, but often what we do is the opposite. We create these exploitative systems. Sarah, it seems like you have thoughts.
So many thoughts. Yeah. One of the reasons why the company wants the alien in the first place is so that they can exploit it. In the earlier movies, it's to create a weapon. In this one, they're also researching ways to improve upon humanity. And when they say improve upon humanity, they're talking about improving humanity's ability to take a hit and then keep on working. There's nothing about improving working conditions on any of these terraforming planets. There's nothing about making the actual lives of human beings easier. It's all about making these people into the perfect tools in order to further the profit of the company. And that I find completely horrifying because it is a kind of unempathetic and faceless evil that looks at other people in the face and says, you don't really matter except as much as you can continue to generate profit for us. So even if you've made your quota, we're going to doom you to die an early death in the mines from black lung disease or whatever other sickness has recently come up on the most recent cycle on the colony.
I mean, maybe one of the most horrifying moments in the film comes early on when Rain sees the sun for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and it's beautiful, except when you realize why she has not seen the sun ever in her life. You know?
Yeah, they describe the planet as sunless early on. And a really nice opening section of establishing their lives as miners on this dark planet. I think that's handled really well.
Yeah, there's even a PA announcement waking everybody up for their next shift that says something along the lines of like, good morning, workers. If you're feeling ill, check into your supervisor, to the med bay. We appreciate all of the work that you've done for the company, basically. But when that address is made, it doesn't feel remotely personal at all.
Right.
It feels as though they're just making a couple of rote mandated statements purely because they want to give off the appearance of being empathetic.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I love... Go ahead, Jer.
Oh, well, so I just kind of wanted to put a bow on all what you asked me about, you know, this exploitation and overcoming the limits of our evolution and all of that. I think if faith has a place, we look back through the whole of the Christian and Jewish canon of Scripture, and it is God constantly saying, hey, you know what? There's always someone that's going to slip through the cracks, right? No system is perfect. Every system has people that are vulnerable. And, you know, the classic trio in the Bible is widows, orphans, and immigrants, right? And God, I mean, literally says again and again through the prophets, like, the metric for how you will know whether you are actually my people is the degree to which the vulnerable are cared for. Because again, we tend to create systems that exploit. And sometimes it's inevitable. Again, every system is going to have cracks. And so what makes God's people is when we do what God does, which is attend to those who cannot tend to themselves, which again, when we're talking about God and us, we call it grace. For some reason, when we talk about people and other people, it becomes like social justice or something like that. But it's like when God did it, we called it good news, you know?
Yeah. And that's where you can see, in terms of the vulnerable in these movies, this is where the company, the corporation, and the xenomorph are almost one in the same, in that they're both aimed at the vulnerable, often at the same time. And so it's a double adversary that our main characters are facing in these movies.
And that's one of the signs of humanity for the protagonists. Ripley goes back for the ship's cat in the very first movie, and that's one of the things that demonstrates her humanity. And Rain goes back time and again for the people who cannot defend themselves either. And that's just a constant through line throughout these movies, is that small ray of hope that's not necessarily going to save anybody, but it is that recognition that those people have worth, even if leaving them behind might make things more survivable for you in that moment.
So I love all the book references we've had on this show already. I'm going to throw mine in there because I want to talk about Alien Romulus as a creature feature.
Yes.
Now, when I wrote my book on horror movies, fear not, I didn't write about the Alien films. I figured Sarah had it covered. And there's the great debate about whether they really are horror movies or not. But I would have included them in the chapter on creature features if I was going to do it. And in that chapter, I suggested there are two kinds of creature features. So they're the ones that the monsters represent the discreation of the fall, in the sense that suddenly animals are now dangerous to humanity, right? Think of Jaws as an extreme example of this, just an animal gone rogue. Then there are those creature features where humanity's disordered dominion over nature, so its exploitation of nature, to use your term, Sarah, results in monstrous creatures. So here we've got Jurassic Park, to name another Steven Spielberg film. And the Alien movies strike me, if you look at them as a whole, as encompassing both, really. The early leaner ones maybe suggest a disordered monster of pure evil, while the prequels we've gotten from Ridley Scott, who also directed the first one, but Prometheus and Alien Covenant, they touch a little bit more on human or maybe humanoid, we can say meddling, that leads to the xenomorphs. And now we have Alien Romulus. So I'd love to hear from you two where you think things fall here along this spectrum. I know it's a little different lens than the corporation as the ultimate villain one, but if we're thinking of these as creature features, do we get monsters of inherent evil in Romulus? Do we get monsters as a result of human mismanagement? I think, JR, you said at one point, they should be manageable if you just follow, the safety precautions. So is it the humans? Where are you, JR, if you looked at it through these two options? And it's probably not an either or.
No. I think the xenomorphs fit nicely into the disordered creation category if you read them as cosmic horror. Which, H.R. Geiger, the designer of these things, very influenced by the horror of H.P. Lovecraft and all of that. And again, cosmic horror is the monster that's trapped in the basement of the Enlightenment, right? As scientific progress advanced and we learned that, the Earth is not the center of the universe and things like this, and confidence in religious institutions fell, we began to get people who said, what if the fundamental law of the universe is not love? What if it's not self-sacrificial love? What if it's this cold indifference? And so that's where you get like the elder gods like Cthulhu and all of that, right? And I think the xenomorph, the look is there. Again, the cold indifference, they see you as an incubator, not even food, right?
Right.
Literally just an incubator.
Way worse.
Yeah, they don't, you cannot reason with them. There is no taming them. They're a pure death machine. And there is nothing you can do about it. That's cosmic horror. And I think that's very much the disordered creation. And I think that the Weyland-Yutani Corporation does fit into the other side of it. The human mismanagement creates a creature like this evil corporation, which does again, as we've said multiple times, it's the same thing as the xenomorph. It's just that humans made it. And there's even a sense, right? Like I know in Prometheus, we meet the founder, but like at this point, it's not even clear that anyone does run Weyland-Yutani. Mm-hmm. We don't know who their board of directors is. It could be an AI. Maybe it's David, the Michael Fassbender android. Like it largely functions almost autonomously, certainly anonymously. I genuinely think, Josh, that Alien is one of the few franchises that is both and creature feature in the way you set it up.
Does that track with you?
I had not put that together before.
What do you think, Sarah? Does that track with you?
Oh, it absolutely tracks. I don't think I could have said it any better than JR did. I think it's telling, too, that humanity continually keeps trying to meddle with that creation and keeps making it more and more disordered, especially as the series moves on. Gets a little bit convoluted when you introduce the timelines and the prequels into there and everything. And honestly, I think that feels more like a feature than a bug because it speaks to kind of the way that this is always true, regardless of when it happens in the course of this story across all of these movies.
Yeah. It's a through line of evil for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Should we do some spoiling?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. So here's your warning if you haven't seen Alien Romulus yet. Some of the things we've touched on come to the fore in the final 20 minutes. There's something that happens earlier that I'm going to guess none of us are a big fan of. Do we want to start with that? JR is raising
JR,
his
please tell
hand.
me you have a hot take.
I liked it.
Oh, tell us what happened and then tell us why you liked it, JR.
And defend yourself, please.
I came ready. Okay. So, when Andy gets his upgrade, it is because Rain finds a module in another android that is on the ship. It is an android named Rook. It is destroyed, and it turns out that it is played by Ian Holm, who played the android Ash in the original Alien film. And he died in 2020, so this is not actually him. And in the credits, I think it says like look and vocal performance, Ian Holm, and then there's an actual actor that is credited with the acting of the android.
Yeah, Daniel Betts. It's a very strange credit. It says Rook, quote, facial and vocal performance by Daniel Betts, then, quote, facial and vocal reference, end quote, of Ian Holm. That's how they handled it.
Sarah, I think, has done more research on this than I have, but from what I understand, Alvarez reached out to Holmes' family,
Yes.
and there was some, at least lore that this is all coming from Alvarez. I don't know that any of his family has sat down for interviews, so we're getting it all third hand, which again, lots of grains of salt with that. They said that Holmes felt that he had been sort of like blacklisted from Hollywood later in life, and so that they felt this was they gave their consent for his likeness to be used, because they felt this would be something that would honor him and honor his legacy in the film franchise. I will say the reason it worked for me was twofold. One, I really liked the idea that, again, there's like this one model of android that gets replicated a whole bunch of times. And so we see another one, and it's Ash, but it's not Ash, but man, is it Ash. And I think as someone who, I would consider myself like probably more than a casual fan of the franchise, but I think even a casual fan of the franchise would recognize him pretty immediately. And there's a whole bunch of characterization and dread that gets imported into the scene because you know who this android is,
Sure,
and what he does. And I thought in terms of special effects that what we got on the screen was just on the effective side of the uncanny valley for me. I had just gone back and rewatched the original Alien, which again, 1979, I'm not throwing shade at, special effects or whatever, but like it was pretty clear he was like a guy sticking out of the floor. I know they didn't cut Ian Holm in half and have him vomit milk, right? And so I think because the CGI was still, it made him feel more artificial to me in a way that I think enhanced my dread. And I will reserve my thoughts about consent of dead actors, because I know that from, again, having read Sarah's review, I know that that's a big area where she comes down, I think, differently than me, though not necessarily opposed. So, but am I right in saying that the issue that has folks upset, I think, understandably, is the use of a dead actor in the franchise, in the film?
I feel like it's kind of reignited a debate that happened around, I believe it was Star Wars Rogue One. And then, this debate's also been happening since Gladiator, since they had to film some scenes around an actor who passed away during production there too. And for those, they actually had to rewrite a little bit of the movie in order to make the part fit a little bit better. So this isn't anything that's new necessarily. It's just the technology that's new. And I'm troubled by it largely because of the idea of Ian Holm's family says that they have consented. And that is something that they have done. Like, they've given the blessing of the estate. But I don't know that we can ever actually know what Ian Holm himself would have wanted. And so I'm uneasy with the idea of using the image of a dead actor who cannot actually have any say in their performance, only in the use of their likeness. And it kind of reminded me of, or at least it made a recurring line within Alien Romulus stick a little bit more, which is this idea of we're doing what's best for the company now. That's Andy's new directive, is that he's doing what's best for the company. And what's best for the company in terms of the company that's actually producing these movies is more profit. And if you can bring in a lot of fans who like and appreciate the previous movies and give them the ability to see something that they know and like, then that might potentially lead to more profit, which is what's best for the company. And it kind of cycles in this way that I don't particularly think is necessarily an ethical use of somebody's image. I mean, if Ian Holm had still been alive and he had said no, then they would have had to go with another actor. But because he's not there to say no, then they have the ability to go forward with it. So I don't know. There are other people who have played androids in the Alien series who also could have come back, possibly. And I know one of the reasons that Fede Alvarez gave in the interview where he discussed this decision was all of the other androids had the ability to come back at least once. You get Michael Fassbender playing David twice. You have Lance Henriksen playing Bishop twice. This is also a little bit of Winona Ryder erasure because she plays an android in Alien Resurrection and she never got to come back. But I digress anyway. So that's my misgivings with this specific character.
Yeah, there's definitely irony at work there when it comes to this idea of exploitation that we've been talking about, which is a theme in the in the series. I would say I probably fall closer to you, Sarah, though overall I was aesthetically offended more than anything. I just don't think the technology was there, JR. It was, especially in a movie that is employing so many practical sets and effects and gore and stuff like that. It really stood out as a sore thumb to me. But yeah, it's something that's here. It's been here for a while, to Sarah's point, and it's going to be increasingly here. And so some sort of framework for how we think about these things is going to be increasingly important.
I think 30 years from now, we're going to look back at this period as a sort of a gray area, because I would be shocked if any actor who is dying after Alien Romulus comes out doesn't have some kind of like statement in their will, like yes or no, you can, or and under what conditions.
Yeah.
So I think we're quickly approaching where we won't have to wonder about the consent question.
No,
right?
That's interesting.
But we are in that space right now. And yeah, I remember when Leia shows up in Rogue One and I was like, ooh,
yeah,
that was,
I don't know that I could think of an instance that does really work for me. So,
I mean, I'm a defender of Jeff Bridges and Tron Legacy being de-aged personally, but that's because of the Uncanny Valley piece. And I did go back and I watched Romulus a second time, and the aesthetic piece didn't bother me too much. It was a little bit distracting, but to JR's point, I found it a little bit more of the Uncanny Valley. This character is more of a robot. And then that also speaks to the personhood of this character, which the movie is very firmly on the side of this is not a person.
Yeah.
This is a tool of the company, which I'm also very uncomfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
I think what settles me is particularly now again, I don't know anything about their marriage. Maybe they hated each other, but the fact that his widow and his kids allegedly said, this is a way for us to like honor our father in a way that he felt slighted by an industry that he gave a lot to. Maybe that's just where I am professionally now, but I'm like,
it's definitely context to consider for sure.
Yeah. For me, that was what brought it back around. Because you're right, we can't know. But I guess I was thinking like if I were Ian Holm, I would love that my family chose that, Now I'm not Ian Holm, never met the guy, have no idea what his personality is like. He could be a very, very different person for me.
It's good to know, JR, that Think Christian, after you're gone, we'll be able to use all of your audio and repurpose it in many ways. Thank you for your consent on that.
Sarah can write scripts that I'll just say, like whatever. Yeah. All of a sudden, I'm the biggest fan of all of her hot takes. Yep.
This is great.
I'll take that, actually.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yes.
Well, you've given us a lot of good stuff in this episode. You both have. So thank you for that. We have mentioned your books, which listeners should definitely track down: Becoming Alien and Empathy for the Devil. You guys both have active newsletters as well. So Sarah, fill in folks on yours.
Yeah, I co-write the Seeing and Believing newsletter with Kevin McLenithan, another Chicago-based film critic. We send out reviews, I want to say like every other week, every couple of weeks, about movies that have just come out. So by the time you hear this, we probably will have just released our review of Beetlejuice, but we also have a review of Alien Romulus as well. So you can find us at seeingandbelieving.substack.com there.
And where can listeners find your newsletter, JR?
jr4stairs.substack.com. By the time this is out, I'll have an article up about how I did not realize that Karate Kid is woke until I rewatched it with my nieces recently and was staggered.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
That is a tease. Well done, sir. Well done. Thanks again. Always good to talk Alien. Maybe we'll do it again when the next installment comes around.
The TV show.
The TV show, yes.
Alien Earth, Noah Hawley.
We can do that.
Yep.
That's definitely a possibility. All right, we'll reconvene for that. Otherwise, till then, take care, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Now, on a previous episode of the TC podcast, Sarah and I discussed her book specifically, Becoming Alien. You can still find that conversation on our website at thinkchristian.net/podcast. Then I wrote about Alien Covenant, the previous film in the series before Romulus, when it came out in 2017. You can also find that on the website, and we'll link to both of those in the show notes for this episode. We're not quite sure what we're going to talk about coming up on the podcast. So if you have suggestions for a movie or a TV show, or maybe some music that you would like us to talk about, you can always connect with us on Facebook and Twitter/X. Find us at Think Christian. As I mentioned, we are now on Instagram as well. Or if you want to send us an email with one of those suggestions, tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net is where you can do that. The TC Podcast is a listener and donor-supported production of Reframe Ministries, a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. Visit reframeministries.org for more information. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder. I'm Josh Larson. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks to consider how another corner of our pop culture fandom connects with our faith.